Hello, friends. This is Jim here with Science Talk. I want to bring to you some reports that are coming from the Energy Mix, that also includes Climate Change Network publication. It's an online publication. And I want to discuss what we see right here. Disappointing national climate plans insufficient to avert crisis. Let's see what they have to say. At last year's UN Climate Summit in Glasgow, 193 governments promised to strengthen their national climate targets within 1 year. But only about 2 dozen of them have delivered on that promise, leaving civil society representatives wary of more empty promises and false solutions at the onset of COP27. The progress over the last year have moved the world away from the more catastrophic pathways it was on only a few years ago, reports the Washington Post. But as COP27 begins, data show humanity remains on a perilous path. Not only are national emissions plans insufficient, but some proposed actions may even protect the status quo from a transformative move off fossil fuels. Okay, translation. Politicians don't have any guts. A lot of them are bought off by fossil fuel industry. Lobbyists persuade politicians to not do anything, really. So this doesn't surprise me. Call me cynical. This doesn't surprise me. We know the national plans are insufficient. Just look around the world. And don't forget, okay, this article doesn't really mention it, but there's a thing called a little war going on over there in Ukraine. And what was the response? Especially East Germany and other European nations trying to get off of using Russian fossil fuels. It was scrambling to get other fossil fuel sources. They were talking about, let's drill, send more gas, drill for more oil. Let's refire up the coal plants that we shuttered. They're missing an opportunity. They're missing an opportunity to go with renewable, cleaner energy sources. Could be, hydroelectric from the ocean. It could be solar. It could be wind. It could be geothermal, which Iceland's doing a lot of. But instead, we got policies that were basically knee-jerk reaction and is only going to make matters worse, in my view. Referring to controversial technologies like carbon capture and blue hydrogen, that you can't tackle climate change by cheating, said Julia Levin, who is the National Climate Program Manager at Environmental Defense Canada. She told a panel evaluating the initial wave of announcements. We cannot win the fight against climate change without getting off fossil fuels. Correct. To deliver meaningful progress, COP27 must close the door on these false solutions. If governments, companies, financial institutions don't have a plan to phase out oil and gas production, they don't have a plan to combat climate change. It's that simple. Now, I welcome such blunt language. I do. Will her message fall on deaf ears? That remains to be seen. But she is spot on, 1,000% correct. United Nations Climate Secretariat says national efforts to curb emissions are successfully slowing the rate of emissions, But so far, those efforts still have the world on track to warm about 2.5 degrees C above pre industrial levels by the end of this century, far above the 1.5 C target in the 2015 Paris Agreement, which is itself now turning out to be acutely dangerous. 2.5 C might arrive, if things continue as they are, a hell of a lot sooner than 2100. A hell of a lot sooner. I'd see 3 to 4 by 2050. With each fraction of a degree of warming, tens of millions more people worldwide would be exposed to life threatening heat waves, food, water scarcity, coastal flooding, while millions more mammals, insect, birds, plants would disappear. And you can add fires and droughts, precipitation bombs, sea level rise, obviously tied into coastal flooding, infiltration of water into infiltration of seawater into water tables, turning the water brackish and making that unsuitable for human use, or at least not potable. An assessment of nationally determined contributions, NDCs, that underpin the Paris Agreement goals paint another less than optimistic picture of climate progress. Analysis by the World Resources Institute, WRI, found that so far NDCs across the globe have failed on all three fronts: limiting global warming to 1.5 C, promoting adaptation and resilience, and channeling funding toward low carbon development. Basically, 0 for 3. Compared to the initial commitments that countries drafted after the Paris Agreement, today's NDCs are both significantly more ambitious than their predecessors and woefully inadequate to avert the climate crisis, so says the WRI, pointing out the world will miss its Paris goals by a long shot if the rate of improvement since 2016 continues. So whatever little rate of improvement, quote unquote, is obviously progressing too slow a pace and will be insignificant, insufficient to slow down the warming. The notion of, we're going to get it to stop by 1.5, 2.5, 3 words: ocean, heat, content. For the most part, the new and updated NDCs represent incremental improvement when what is needed is transformational change. That's because countries now convening in Egypt for COP27 have largely failed to bring adequate plans to the table. Despite increasingly severe impacts from climate change and a growing body of science saying those impacts will worsen without appropriate action, a total of 172 countries have not updated their targets. Disappointing is how Claire Feisen, co-head of the climate policy team at Climate Analytics, described the lackluster reality. Few governments have really done anything to substantially move the dial. Disappointing is being extremely kind, extremely polite. I think stronger language needs to be used, and I'll let you think of some of the terms that can be used. Among the most notable countries with lacking ambition are, wait for it, China and the United States, the world's two biggest sources of carbon pollution. Hold on. Hang on. Gee, that's a shock. Not. In fact, only one large emitter, Australia, has issued a plan that includes stronger commitments to cut emissions. But Australia came from a very, very low baseline, said German climatologist Nicholas Hearn. They have a lot of catching up to do. Financing for climate adaptation and resilience is also proceeding slower than needed, as shown by the developed world's 30 years of stalled promises to help vulnerable nations finance their response to climate impact. While action is lacking, there's been a notable increased focus on the issue as vulnerable nations repeat the demands for loss and damage payments. Well, it's one thing to say, oh, yeah, there's a problem there. It's another thing to actually do something about it. Lorraine Chiponda, co-lead of the Don't Gas Africa campaign and Africa Climate Movement of Movements coordinator, said this year's COP must ensure that adaptation financing is directed to renewable infrastructure rather than a fossil fuel expansion. Chiponda noted a recent trend of African leaders moving to label gas as a clean energy source. It's not. And pointed to similar attempts by the European Union to reclassify both gas and nuclear power as green, despite the fossil industry's overwhelming contribution to the climate crisis. Chiponda said that the drive to reframe carbon based energy sources could lead to some countries, including ones in Africa, accepting false solutions in their climate strategies. That in turn would help some sectors misdirect UN climate negotiations. She cautioned that this COP might be a gas COP, given the large focus of financial institutions and governments on gas as a transition fuel. Once again, we have a situation, scientists, we do our work. We collect the data, we analyze it carefully. We tell you what's happening. We tell you our recommendations. Unfortunately, we can recommend policies, but we don't get to make policies nor enact them. That's the role, that's the job of the politicians, and the politicians are basically dragging their feet. They're doing nothing. So, to me, at this point, it's analogous to Nero fiddling while Rome burns. Politicians are simply fiddling away, twirling their thumb, hell, sticking their thumbs up their asses, while the planet literally is burning. So, and again, we got the situation with, this, I was just saw here with, gas is a transition fuel. No, gas is not. But that's just so, well, it burns cleaner. It still is putting CO2 into the atmosphere. The gas is basically methane. You combust that with oxygen, you're going to get CO2 and water, both of which are greenhouse gases. So you're substituting one greenhouse gas for two. Hey, that's a bargain. So, and again, I mean, just again, look at what I'm talking. What we've seen here in Europe. You got Norway sending pipelines across the Baltics and the North Sea and so forth. To Europe, we got pipeline. Of course, the Nord Stream's been blowing up now, so that's kind of moot. But you have this LNG plants being built. Liquid natural gas. That's natural gas. That's still gas. So we're seeing this rush of building LNG plants, and we're just going to supply gas everywhere. That's not going to do anything other than contribute to higher CO2 levels, CO2 equivalent levels, and thus higher warming levels. So yes, it's disappointing. I would use the word infuriating that politicians refuse to act. Okay, there you have it. Don't expect anything groundbreaking to come out of COP.